And we're in the middle, sorry, of our awkward series, talking about things that are awkward. And I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about a really awkward topic for Christians and the church, and that question that I kind of came up with this week, or that was kind of been heavy on my heart, is um, what should our response be to the outcry for the removal of anything offensive in our culture? Whether it's the monuments or whether it's, whatever it is, there's so much that seems to offend at least one group of people in our nation today. And how, as Christians, do we look for a biblical answer on how we should respond? And so I kind of want to talk about that this morning. And I didn't want to, I didn't go into this with a preconceived notion. I wanted to go to the Bible and say, what does it have to say about how we should respond as Christians? And so, I'm not sure it gets any more awkward than we're talking to a fellow Christian about this subject. And maybe we totally disagree with them, or on what their side or our side stands for, or that awkward conversation when speaking with someone who's not a Christian, and they're on the complete opposite side than we are. So let's kind of dive into what the Bible has to say on the subject. And the first thing I want to talk about is Paul in Athens. And it's found in Acts chapter 17, verses 19 through 31. And again, that's Acts 17, 19 through 31. And it says this: "And they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Agropolis. And they said to him, 'May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean.' Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Agropolis and said, 'People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription: to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very things that you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. He is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out one man, or their appointed times in history, and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that we would seek him and perhaps reach out to him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design or skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead." And it goes on. People got pretty excited about this resurrection of the dead and the argument there. But I just like to say, Paul, when faced with a monument or a statue of something he didn't believe in, he didn't get offended by it. He just simply said, "Here's the deal. You guys don't understand what this stands for." And so he could have gotten mad. He could have said, "We got to tear this thing down, or we've got to enshrine it," whatever it is. Instead, he used it as a teaching moment. He said, "Look at this thing. Let me tell you what this represents. Let me tell you why. Let me show how this particular statue points towards God." So Paul didn't get mad. He got a little bit snippy. There's an exclamation point in there, but he used it as a teaching moment. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. So Jesus in the temple, and Jesus at the temple. And this is found in Mark 13, 1 through 8. And again, that's Mark 13, 1 through 8. As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." "Do you see these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are about to be fulfilled?" Jesus said to them, "Watch out no one deceives you. Many will come in my name claiming I am he, and will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines, and these are the beginning of the birth pains. So Jesus is, in front of the temple, and one of his disciples is like, "Man, this is beautiful. This is awesome. I love this." And Jesus said, "Now hold on a second." He said, earthly things change. This is beautiful today. Tomorrow it's going to be torn down, kingdom against kingdom. He goes on to teach about the end times and how he used it kind of to put in perspective the futility of concentrating on earthly things, that these things do pass, and that in the end it will be about your relationship with God, not about the building or a statue or any of the marvelous things that you're seeing in our world today. Interesting point. The third one and last one I want to talk about in the Bible anyway, and then we'll kind of do a little life application on this, is the old story. I shouldn't say it's a story; it's biblical history of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And if you remember right, Nebuchadnezzar, his people went to him and said, "You're such an awesome king that you should be kind of like a god, and people should worship you." And it's the story is found in Daniel chapter 3. Verses 1 through 6. And again, that's Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. And it says this: King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image of King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and people of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." And we'll pick the story up with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were some of the officials, and they chose not to bow down. And other officials were going to use it as a way to take them out. And in verse 13, it picks up and says, "Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, 'Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?' Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, 'King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into a blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up.' So the king makes a statue, and it's a law that they have to worship it. And the three refused to worship a created thing rather than the creator. They went against it, and we know from the story that God saved them. They were brought out, and Nebuchadnezzar ended up going crazy and all kinds of other things, but God rescued them. But they chose not to worship this image, this statue, this God. And so how does these apply to us today when we're having this awkward conversation about what we do with monuments, or what we do with our nation, or what we do with historical stuff, flags, whatever? Well, when we see these things, we have, as Paul did, we have one of two options. When we see them, we can either get mad and make it about us, or we can use them as a teaching moment, like Paul did. He said, "People of Athens, I see that you have a statue of an unknown God. Let me tell you who the real God is." When we see these statues, we can choose to get offended, and we can choose to get mad, or we can say, "Look, here is what this stands for. We may not believe it. It may not be what we believe in. It may even make us in our hearts sad. But here is what we need to know about it. here's where we can do better. Here's where we need to go with this. Use it as a teaching moment. The second thing I was thinking about when we're faced with these conversations or these images is, as Jesus was, we need to be knowledgeable enough to understand the context and the signs of the times. So where Jesus looks at the temple and says, look, this is going to get destroyed. And not only is it going to get destroyed, but this is going to lead to more things that are going to happen and then the end times. And as I see people getting offended either because something is going to be torn down or isn't torn down, it seems to me that in a lot of cases, there are a lot of people who don't know enough history to be able to see where this is going, or to see where this stops, or to see how things that make us sad in our hearts, we can use to make things better in our world. So we have to understand the signs of the time. We have to be knowledgeable enough, whether that's biblical or historically or culturally, to be able to speak into it, because there's so much misinformation. There's so much speaking from pure feelings rather than what the context of the times are. And so we need to look into that. The third thing I would caution, or the third thing I would say with the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is I see a lot of people in our nation today worshiping things, whether it be a flag or a statue or even our nation itself, or and literally letting it consume all their time and energy. I don't think God needs us to spend all our time defending the United States flag or the Star Spangled Banner. Now, I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying if we're putting that ahead of God, then man, we need to be careful with that, because we see what happens with a temple that gets destroyed and nation against nation and all of that. In the same case, if we're spending all our time being offended and fighting against some statue or some flag or some anthem, then I think anything that we put ahead of God is literally worshiping something else. And I would caution all of us to be careful not to worship an image, but to make sure God is first place. And then we can talk about some of the social justice issues, or then we can talk about some of the things that need to be changed in our society, or some of the things that need to stay the same. But make sure we're not worshiping that and instead of worshiping God, because nothing makes a nation fail faster than to worship itself as opposed to him. So remember that, keep that in mind. So if you're one of the ones who are calling for removal of anything offensive, I would caution you against losing valuable teaching moments. If you're one who's completely enamored with the beauty of the monument, and I would caution you to understand that everything passes away eventually, but God is the only constant. If you're someone who's almost to the point of worshiping a statue or a flag or an idea, then I would caution you to examine who is getting your worship, your attention, and your thoughts. Well, probably what I've done in this awkward conversation is probably made everyone mad in the world, and that's okay. But I felt for my own sake, I needed to see what the Bible had to say about something that is so up front in our media today. And not just get caught up in my own ideas of how it should be or how it should look. So I hope you take a moment this weekend, especially as it's Independence Day weekend, and in the middle of fireworks and camping or barbecues with friends, that you'll take a moment to reflect on our nation and where it is, where it needs to go, what it needs to be, what our history looked like, how did that play out, and mostly take a look at what in my heart am I worshiping? Am I worshiping images? Am I worshiping the destruction of images? What am I putting ahead of me, putting ahead of God in my life, that I need to say, maybe this isn't about me. Maybe this is about how I can show the world God. Maybe this is how I can get a little smarter about the historical context of both sides of the argument. Maybe this is a time where I can examine what and who I'm worshiping. Well, I hope you had a great weekend.